Hello and welcome to Different Conversations, where every week we have a different academic from the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, University of Westminster, talking about their work and their research. This week, I've got my good friend and colleague, Dr. Oliver Hayworth. Ollie, how's it going today?
Hi, how are you, Brad? I'm okay.
I like that. Everyone always says they're okay, and I'm always like, well, why not? Why aren't we brilliant? What's going on at the moment that you're just okay?
Yeah, it's a nice morning. I'm fully caffeinated. It's good.
We had a brief chat before this, so I hear you're 4 coffees in at the moment. That's quite caffeinated.
Yeah, but I started early actually. Once I have my coffees, and then I'm sorted for the rest of the day. That gives me the necessary boost to get through all the things I've got to do in the morning. And then definitely.
Like a lot of academics, we have a bit of a problem with coffee, I think. Anyway, this podcast has been very much defined by COVID-19. And so everyone I've talked to this summer has been like, so your work's been affected by COVID in particular ways. But I really particularly wanted to have you on this show for the specific reason that you've had your work's been much more affected by COVID in a very different way. So what have you been up to these last few months?
I've been working at the UK Biocentre outside Milton Keynes, working in a pop-up lab where we tested COVID-19 samples. And I did that for 3 months from April until a couple of weeks ago. And it was an amazing experience, one that I really, really enjoyed. Some of the happiest moments of my life occurred in this, testing COVID in essentially an industrial unit outside Milton Keynes, which was very strange, but it was a really, really good experience. So
because like you mentioned, this was a pop-up facility, but it was quite a major one. We're not talking about a small lab. This was a big deal, right?
Yeah, this was huge. So the UK Biocentre originally was set up as a kind of a store for clinical samples and for long-term kind of drug trials. And then upon this crisis, they decided to use it to build it up as a COVID-19 testing lab. So everything had to be brought in from scratch. We had the army involved in the logistics, which was it was a bit strange because you'd be walking down a corridor, and you see the army there, and you're like, oh, wow, well, this is not something I expected. And lots of people from lots of different backgrounds were all rushed together to build this, they called the Mega Lab, which was a huge lab, as you can imagine. And we got various pieces of equipment from academic and non-academic institutions like hoods, PCR machines, machines called Kingfishers. So they came from all around the UK, from all different sources, and they were put together and assembled in this lab. And there was, I think that we went from, there's about 200 people working there, and they were divided into 4 shifts, so days and nights. So this operation was occurring 24/7. And we went from doing a very small number of samples to doing around about 30,000 in a 24-hour period. It was a huge operation. And it was kind of exciting.
I know, for example, that the UK population's really familiar with testing numbers now because it's been very much a new story. Today we tested this many. Today we tested this many. So this was one of you called it a mega lab that was doing this testing for the society, wasn't it, on COVID-19?
Yes. So the numbers at the start, the number that we were testing was quite small, and then within 2 weeks it just shot up. And that was a real kind of rush. That was a really exciting time. Everybody involved was really motivated, and just worked incredibly hard under quite difficult circumstances because nobody really knew how to do things. It was all kind of, well, we'll just try it. We'll, hopefully this will work. It was all about trying to get things done. In a lab that had only been in existence for like 3 weeks, and with a bunch of strangers. Nobody knew each other. So it was kind of an interesting experiment where you kind of throw in a lot of people who never met together under quite stressful conditions under a time of national crisis. And it was all right, we need to get this done. So things were being things changed very rapidly. Protocols evolved very rapidly about how we do things. So yeah, it was always changing. Towards the end of my time, it kind of stabled a little bit. Things became a bit more set in stone. But at the start, it was all about, right, we need experts in this. We need experts in this. Right, come on, let's get together. Let's crack heads and let's get this. Try and get this sorted. So it was a really exciting time and lots of amazing people. Really inspiring environment to be part of. So yeah.
No, it absolutely sounds like it. And so you're a lecturer in biochemistry at the School of Life Sciences. You mentioned already the army was there.
Yeah.
And you mentioned this range of people coming in. So what type of people are we talking about?
People who are experts in virology. We had experts in people in PCR, molecular biology. We had a lot of postdocs, PhD students, people from biotech, from pharma, some people who'd been retired, who come out of retirement, some undergraduates, a few people like me, kind of lecturers. And some people hadn't really had much experience. And one of the amazing things was the team leader, which I was involved, was a woman, and she was a plant biologist from Oxford. You didn't need to there were people there without a background in biomedical science or virology, but they might have been a plant biologist, but they had expertise in PCR. So it's well, yeah, okay, they can do it, So that was really weird. And you had people. What was really interesting is that, and really encouraging, was there was no ego. People left their egos at the door, so you had lots of people from lots of different hierarchies, and to get things done you had to abandon all that. So one of the people who's the section lead was the person who graduated 6 months ago, but then they're in charge of 20, 30 people who are way more experienced and got way more qualifications than they did. But you're well, that you leave that doesn't matter. It's all about getting the task done. So there's none of this egotistical nonsense that you get in most workplaces. It was all about getting the task done. And it's right, okay, I might be more experienced in this. I might have a lot more expertise, but that means nothing. It's all about getting the task done. And the tasks that we involved it was incredibly monotonous, incredibly boring and mind-numbing. It was there's no ways of getting about it. I spent 12-hour shifts pipetting or unbagging clinical samples, and that was mentally hard. But you did it because you had a task in front of you, and so you were just right, okay, I'll ignore that. I'll just get on and do it. And that was the attitude of everybody involved. It's right, let's just crack on, let's just do it. Everything else is not important. So that was really inspiring. That's what, and everybody said it was such an inspiring place to work because there was none of this, like I said, egotistical nonsense that you get in most workplaces. And so you're working side by side with undergraduates or PhD students, and you were all equals. And you were all working together, and it was just a brilliant working environment.
Yeah, you've mentioned that, and it is really awesome and inspiring that it was,
totally,
in some ways, such a positive experience during a real national crisis. But there was another point I want to seize on, and a lot of people I talk to, because we're both life scientists, we spend a lot of time at the bench with pipettes and small volumes and well plates and hoods and PCR and other acronyms that people don't know about, and that's fine. But science is sometimes incredibly boring. Yeah. And a Western blotter can take me 2 days of just boring, but you were doing this, you mentioned 12-hour shifts, just doing 1 or 2 tasks for a 12-hour shift for 3 months. It must have been monotonous.
It was.
Finally.
Because it was, there's no getting away. And sometimes if you were tired, because we were working through the night as well, depending on what kind of shift you were. So you could, and you were incredibly tired and you were incredibly honest. But then we had an amazing team spirit that, kept everybody's spirits going. And so music was incredibly important. We'd had endless arguments about radio station to play. And then somebody brought in an Alexa, an Amazon thing, so we could call out. So I remember one time we were singing Christmas songs in the middle of the night, in the middle of July, or big middle of June, I think it was. Another time we were playing like musicals, just anything to get the spirit going, like to keep people spirits going. And it was. I mean, it sounded monotonous and boring, but it was so much fun. There was times when I couldn't laugh anymore. It just hurt. It was because it was just brilliant fun. People were dancing. I remember quite early on, there was a night shift, and it was like, I think it was about 4:00 on a Sunday or Monday morning, I forget. And we had the music turned up really loud. It was like a dance radio station. And it was like a rave. The energy was amazing. And just to be part of that, to witness it was incredible. And, it's just, these people like who I didn't know, nobody knew each other. And then all of a sudden, like 3 weeks later, you're working in the middle of the night in an industrial unit. And it's like a rave. It's just like, and it was just bizarre. But you couldn't make it up.
Just with more PPE and biosafety rules, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was just, so it was so strange, but so beautiful at the same time. It was just, and like I always go back to saying that everybody involved was absolutely phenomenal. Like we spent so much time together, because we were working a lot, and we became like friends, really tight knit group, and we had like a WhatsApp group, and even now I've left a couple of weeks ago, but other people have left much earlier, and we're still in contact with each other and almost daily, and we're all talking about having a reunion and things like that. So it was the people who made it, without a doubt. Yeah.
And just to continue to embarrass you a little bit more by pointing out things you did during this, this was a volunteer work, correct?
Yes.
You weren't being seconded or paid from the university. You were doing this in your spare time as a volunteer. So you were holding down 2 full-time jobs effectively.
Yes, which was a bit problematic. And I know that I do apologize to anybody who I didn't respond, like their emails I didn't respond to. I'm very much I have to thank Caroline Smith and Linda Percy because they did a lot of work, and they really helped me. And I thank them, and I also apologize for them because I think they were pulling their hair out because I wasn't getting around to doing things as I should do, and I was kind of like I was either working or absolutely exhausted. So that's why I was going to be emailing people in the middle of the night, and always late. When I finished, I spent 2 days just going through emails actually that I'd missed actually. So I was very much supported by the wonderful staff at Westminster. So
that's good to hear that we could because we teach on a similar course, on the same courses. So not ignorant of that stuff. But does that mean that, say, for a normal day for you, you talk about doing overnight 12-hour shifts, you'd be working overnight, then catching up on sleep, then doing Westminster work, then trying to catch up on sleep again, and then doing another 12-hour shift?
Yeah, there was time. Well, so trying to sleep during the day is really difficult. And because we were doing you do 2 or 3 days, 2 or 3 shifts, and they might be 12-hour shifts, and then you'd have a couple of days off. So you're always you're always going back and forth. So it was really difficult to get, if you're working night shifts, it was really difficult to get a stable kind of pattern going. And so I'd be lucky if I got 5 hours sleep during a day and often, so I'd be doing that. And then I'd be trying to do Westminster stuff, perhaps a couple of hours before I had to start my other job. And then when I was working, I was taking in my laptop. And during breaks, I was trying to answer emails and do other things as well. And so, but I was always, it was really difficult and struggling because it was, even on your days off, you were just exhausted. And it was physically and mentally really hard. It was, I was very lucky to have the support of the staff who I mentioned, and everybody else, and also the students from Westminster who were very patient and understanding.
Brilliant. And I hear there were some highlights as well, apart from 12 hours of pipetting or 12 hours of scanning barcodes. You met the Prime Minister.
That was a strange experience. We got told the day before that a very important person was coming, and we had to be on our best behaviour. So we kind of figured out who it was, but it was kind of funny how we were given this kind of schoolmasterly kind of like talk, like, yeah, you have to behave. And then he kind of came around, but they cleared most of the people away from the lab. So it wasn't like it was a normal working lab. They kind of shuffled most people out of the way. But yeah, I happened to be working, and I had to be scanning barcodes. And so, yeah, he kind of shuffled across. I wouldn't say he walked, he shuffled across where I worked. And then, yeah, he was kind of asking about how things were. And so I gave him a smile and said hello. It was a bit strange. Yeah, it was just a bit bizarre, really. I mean, that was the other weird thing. There was a lot of interest in what we were doing, political interest in what we were doing. So when we started, we were told not to speak to the media because there was a lot of media interest. Apparently, there was media camped outside. It was interesting. It's not every day, the Prime Minister walks into your lab.
One thing I'm kind of curious about, and you can say, I don't know to this, it's fine because it's a bit abstract, but with talk of potential second peaks come the winter, I presume all these facilities are in place to rapidly ramp back up again, in fact, probably quicker than last time.
Well, the facilities are still continuing, and the testing is still continuing at the same pace as it was doing throughout. How the UK Biocentre has evolved is it's now become a bit more of a regular diagnostics testing lab, whereas at the start it was all about like, right, let's get this done, let's get it all set up. And now once it'd been set up, it was kind of slowly evolving. And so a lot of the people involved at the early stage, a lot of the people who quite had experience because that's what they were after, have kind of left, and now they're replacing people with like short-term or 6 months contracts. And so most of those people involved were biomedical science graduates, who were looking for a short-term job. And that was really, it's not a bad job because they paid quite well. They paid all the expenses. They put you up in a hotel, and okay, the work was long and hard and boring, but everybody involved was really nice, and there was a real buzz about it. So it wasn't the worst job in the world, but I found 3 months of doing that and trying to keep another job going at the same time was really, I was just exhausted by the end of it, and I knew I needed a break, and I knew I had to start preparing for the next teaching year, and it felt right. I'd done 3 months. So,
no, fair enough, I think. And knowing your normal caffeine intake during the 3 months of sleep deprivation, you must have just been effectively IV mainlining coffee.
I wasn't actually. No, I think because I would have needed to take a lot of more bathroom breaks, and you can't really do that when you're fully PP'd up. So no, I don't think my caffeine intake increased. I was trying to keep active, but that was kind of difficult. Because you were just constantly tired, or you just felt demotivated, and so it was. Yeah, trying to keep the energy levels was difficult, but then the energy levels were maintained by the people and the environment. That's what kept everybody's spirits going to keep on going. And again, I always say this: it was the people who made it possible.
So there's two things you mentioned there that I'm going to pick up on. One is activity levels, and we're going to come back to that in a minute. But the last one I want to ask you about in terms of your work in this giant facility, you mentioned PPE. So being that this was an unknown virus in a number of ways, especially in the early days, we didn't know a lot about its risk factors involved. What was the PPE like? What was the protective clothing involved?
It wasn't actually that bad. So we were working in biological hoods. So UK Biocentre classified it as level 2. So that meant you could work in normal, tissue culture hoods. And we wore regular lab coats, we wore glasses, we wore gloves, and we got parcel tape, and we wrapped parcel tape around our wrists. So it was kind of secure. And then we double gloved in the hoods. At the start, we used to wear face masks, but then we stopped doing those. We stopped wearing face masks because we were working in hoods. And also, if you're wearing a face mask for 12 hours, it gets really oppressive. The biggest kind of bottleneck in the whole testing was the fact that all the samples had to be opened in biological hoods. So you had the swabs and they were in a liquid, excuse me. But you had to assume that there was still active virus. So if people really want to ramp up the testing process, they need to be able to put the swab and then deactivate in solution, and then everything can be done in the open. But we couldn't. And that was because everything had to be done in hoods until the virus was deactivated. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't too bad, but it was. You had to have good skills and being able to, good sterile technique and things like that. So that's why at the start they were wanting people with, lab experience, basically. So you're a lot more familiar with working in a hood and sterile technique.
It's really interesting to me as a fellow life scientist how important the fundamentals, the basics are there when we talk about good technique, working sterile, the things we teach our first year students almost. Yeah. That it was a lot about the pedantry and the accuracy of just doing it properly and right.
Yeah.
And just to mention, for anyone listening who's not familiar with the terms, the hood is a biological containment space or box where you can work inside and things don't get out, right? And then category 2 is, of the 4 categories in the UK, we classify things by risk, where 2 is the second to lowest. It's not actually that bad. A lot of our university labs are category 2. So really interesting to me. I thought it would have been category 3 perhaps, like full-on suits and positive pressure and stuff like that.
No, because I think at the start they would have perhaps done that, but it wouldn't have been possible to process the number of samples otherwise. And once the virus was deactivated, everything was done on the benchtop. I mean, a lot of the process was automated, but at the start, the scanning the barcode, scanning of the samples, taking out the samples, pipetting, that all had to be done. A lot of that was manual. But then subsequently, all the other processes were automated. But so a lot of the focus was at the start of the testing process. So that was really interesting because I've never worked in a diagnostic or testing lab or a factory or lab before, and it's essentially a factory. That's what it was. So you could see how the samples were processed from beginning to end. It was quite interesting actually, because it was although it was a lab, it wasn't a lab in any way, shape or form that I'd kind of identified or had experience of. So it was a really big learning experience for me actually.
Without going too far off topic, I had a good friend of mine, a few of them actually, during the Ebola crisis a few years ago, working abroad on diagnostics in that field. And they came back with horror stories that are very similar to yours about monotony, repetitiveness, just doing the same thing every day, but 35 degrees, humidity, and the full body suits for 12-hour shifts. And when does that get fun? That was an awful time, but important work, of course. Just a lot of sweat gathering in your feet, apparently.
We had an adjacent lab we called it Siberia, and because there was a few hoods and people got sent out there to just unbag samples and put tubes in boxes, and people could be doing that for 12 hours and 2 or 3 shifts in a row, and it was a form of probably classified as psychological torture now, or because it was just incredibly boring. I fortunately didn't have to do very much of that, but some people did. And people described it as, they said they were having like mental breakdowns while they were working there. It's kind of joking aside, but it was serious. It was, but the work had to be done, and people recognized that. If it was a regular job, people would have done that for like 2 hours and said, right, I'm not doing it. But because we were in the middle of a national crisis or international crisis, people were just like, right, I'm just going to crack through it. I'm going to do it. And, there was a lot of personal motivation. There was a lot of support from the other members of the team. And so you were just like, right, let's just go ahead and do this and get on with it. But it was incredibly difficult and incredibly tough. And I was very fortunate because in between shifts, I was going back home. I could go back to normality. But a lot of the people, they were going back to a hotel in the middle of Milton Keynes. And they were kind of isolated. They'd be working and then they'd go back to a hotel room in Milton Keynes where they couldn't socially isolate. They were, were they socially isolated? They couldn't be in contact with anybody else, and it must have been incredibly difficult. People were living in hotels for like 3-4 months, long term. And that's really hard.
Sounds awful. Actually, sounds quite difficult.
Yeah, and that's why the team spirit was so important, because we all looked after each other. When we weren't working together, we were always on on WhatsApp and joking and talking to each other. It was that sense of community and sense of team spirit that was really, really important and really drove and led to this operation being successful. And again, that's something that everybody will reiterate: the team spirit. And, they were like, we will do this together. We're going to do it. We're going to look after each other, because it was mentally hard.
Yeah. All right. And to link back to a point I promised I'd return to in my head when I was mentally making notes there, you talked about how it was really hard to work a long shift, maybe this, then do your work with Westminster, and then find time for activity. Now, I wanted to talk to you, a bit of a topic shift here, about what you consider activity, because you're a bit of an ultra endurance runner, right?
Yeah, I've done a few.
What is ultra endurance? What kind of distances are we talking about here?
So ultra endurance running involves anything beyond your regular 26.2 mile marathon.
Hold on, anything beyond a marathon?
Yeah.
A regular marathon, just a normal, plain, boring regular marathon.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, carry on.
They can be from, 35 to 250 miles, sometimes 500 miles. I had a friend who did one that went on for like 3 or 4 days in the Alps. And yeah, I was introduced to them by a friend. We were at a wedding in Italy, and he was like, "Oh, do you want to do this ultra marathon?" I was like, "Yeah, sure." And so 2 days later, I was somewhere in northern Italy running an ultra marathon. And yeah, I like them. They're very. It's not regular running. It's very organic. You're not running for speed. It's all about just keep on going. So you're not trying to do a personal best. It's all about just keeping yourself going and just completing it. So yeah, I quite enjoy them.
Sounds like a bit of an analogy of our life sometimes, about just dogged determination and keeping on going despite the pain.
Yeah. What's interesting if you do endurance sports is you have periods where you feel amazing, and then there's other periods where you don't feel so good. And it's in those periods when you don't feel so good, you realize you've just got to keep continuing, because things will pick up again. And the important thing to remember is, as long as your feet or your legs are still moving, you're still making progress. It might be slow at the time, but things will pick up. So yeah, it's a useful analogy in science. And just, you will suffer setbacks. You will not feel not so good, but things will always get better in the end. And then you get an amazing sense of achievement when you finish, when you fulfill your task. Yeah.
It sounds exactly, like an analogy of our lives, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Peaks and troughs of academia mirror the peaks and troughs of running an ultra endurance marathon, apparently.
Yeah. Well, I've done other endurance sports as well. So I've done an Ironman. I've done cycling endurance events as well. So yeah, they're good fun.
So when you talk about not being able to find time to exercise, we're talking about going for a run for days here.
I don't do that. I mean, I wasn't doing that. I mean, I was struggling to get the motivation to just like go for a little run around the park or do some exercises. I was, I struggled to. I don't do that as much as I used to, because I'm getting a little bit older and I've got injuries, and I spent probably too much of my time getting up early on a weekend morning and training all day. So I've kind of curtailed that a little bit, but no, I still really enjoy it. I still like being fit. And it's kind of mentally, it's really important for me. So the weekends, I always make sure I try and go out into the countryside and go cycling or go running, something like that, just to clear my head. Yeah.
That's probably, unfortunately, all we have time for today. It only really remains for me to say thank you, Dr. Ollie Hayworth, for your time with us talking about testing, the National Biocentre holding down 2 full-time jobs, and the spirit that was involved in that. My name is Brad Elliott, and I hope you've enjoyed today's different conversation.